Today, I am responding to the Young Turks' fear-mongering about Department of Defense contractors. For background, TYT is reacting to an article in The Lever about a Department of Defense fellowship program that sends military officers to major corporations for a year. This article is based on a recent report by the Quincy Institute. I read the report and I think it's pointless nonsense. Furthermore, I think this TYT segment shows how left-wing narratives are propagated. That is, a random left-wing think tank publishes a stupid report, left-wing outlets like The Lever cover that report, and then left-wing commentators like TYT discuss the coverage of the report. This is nonsense operating at multiple levels, and I'm here to call it out. Please like and subscribe. Now let's get into it.
A recent report by the Quincy Institute for Responsible Statecraft has revealed incredibly damning details on the Secretary of Defense Executive Fellows Program. It's a mouthful, sounds super boring, except it's not when you consider some of the conflicts of interest that are baked into how these fellowships work. Now, under that program, military officers are placed inside corporations, often private defense contractors, for a year.
It does sound super boring because it is super boring, and it is super boring because it's a totally normal sounding program.
And when they return, they become unofficial mouthpieces for the very corporations that they had their fellowships within.
Let me clarify something. When Anna says the military fellows become mouthpieces for a corporation, what she means is that an essential part of the fellowship program is to solicit recommendations from the fellows about how the Department of Defense might improve. These recommendations are compiled into slideshows called outbriefs and are presented to several dozen high-level military officials. Some fellows also write full reports for academic credit. The Quincy Institute report is 28 pages long, not counting the annexes. About 9 pages of the report are dedicated to discussing these recommendations as evidence that there is a conflict of interest here or that corporations are exerting undue influence on the Department of Defense. However, The Lever reports that the Quincy Institute could only find evidence of the Defense Department enacting one recommendation over the years, and that recommendation was to expand its work with private contractors. In addition, the report makes a big deal about how the recommendations made by fellows can benefit the corporations they work for, and so there must be a conflict of interest. The report does not analyze the merits of any of the recommendations they cite. Rather, the report seems to assume that any recommendation that could benefit a defense contractor is inherently a bad thing. This is why Anna refers to the fellows as mouthpieces of corporations, which I think is an unfair way to characterize high-achieving military personnel who are likely just trying to learn from a corporation and improve the Department of Defense.
The fellowship program was launched back in 1995. In total, over 315 military officers have participated in this program.
That's right. A staggering 315 military officers have participated in the fellowship program since 1995. While these participants have elite ranks in the military, they represent a tiny group of people, and so I fail to see how this program represents, as the Quincy Institute put it, a significant threat to the Department of Defense's integrity.
And while the program technically includes a wide range of corporations and a number of industries, there's an obvious conflict of interest when it comes to one industry in particular. As The Lever writes, nearly a third of the fellows were assigned to the top 50 government contractors, and 15% went to work for Boeing, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Raytheon, the top 5 military contractors.
What exactly is the problem here? We're talking about small fractions of an already small contingent of people. It should not be surprising that a third of the fellows were assigned to the top 50 government contractors. Should they have been assigned to corporations that are not government contractors? It's also unsurprising that military contractors host some of these fellows because this is a fellowship program of the Department of Defense. Take a look at this chart from the Quincy report. These are the top beneficiaries of the fellowship from 1996 to 2023. Lockheed Martin is at the top of the list, and they only had 12 fellows during this period. 12. That's not a lot of fellows.
These 5 defense companies spent more than $830 million lobbying the Defense Department and other federal entities during the same years they had fellows, regulatory filings show.
This extraneous information was added by The Lever and meant to poison the well. It is completely irrelevant how much money these defense companies spent on lobbying unless The Lever can show some evidence that the lobbying money is somehow related to this fellowship. Also, $830 million in lobbying sounds like a lot of money, but this is across almost 30 years and split between 5 companies. As a point of reference, Lockheed Martin spent about $14 million on lobbying in 2023. You may dislike that corporations pay for lobbying, but the point is that the lever added this unnecessary information in an attempt to bolster the conclusion that this fellowship is some sort of lobbying scheme.
And so the purpose of this program is so the officers get to study how corporations run?
Sort of? I don't understand Anna's incredulous tone here. I did the hard work of taking 2 minutes to read the website for this fellowship program. The website says that the fellows are placed at the senior leadership level of their respective companies and that the fellows gain insights about change management, adaptive and collaborative structures, knowledge management, the virtual workplace, and how to leverage the best of new technologies and human intellect. I'm not entirely sure what all of that means, but it seems ridiculous to me for Anna to act as though private companies have nothing of value to offer the Department of Defense.
Now, Ben Freeman, one of the authors of this report, writes the following. Let's take a look. Lobbyists would salivate over the opportunity to provide a briefing to Defense Department leadership at that level. This is better lobbying than any money could buy for these companies. When it's somebody who's a military officer coming back to the Defense Department and saying those same talking points, people are going to take that up much more than they would if these kinds of words are coming from a lobbyist.
If I haven't made it clear yet, I reject the notion that this small fellowship program constitutes a lobbying opportunity that is worth salivating over. In fact, I think that notion is incredibly disrespectful to the military officers that avail themselves of this opportunity. The fellows are not paid lobbyists, and pretending that they are effectively lobbyists suggests they have no agency or that they are only self-interested.
And sure enough, private companies have absolutely been hijacking the fellows or this fellowship program to push their own interests. According to the Quincy report, one of the most common recommendations for the Defense Department is to outsource the department's essential functions. An early cohort recommended that the Defense Department should outsource everything not core to the Defense Department. Other cohorts have recommended that other things get outsourced, including information technology, medical services, research and design, finance and accounting, and personnel administration. In other words, public funding for private industry.
This really highlights my problem with the Quincy Institute report. The report says that calls for outsourcing are the most common type of proposal made by the fellows. However, the Quincy Institute and the Young Turks just assume that outsourcing is bad and dismiss the proposals as evidence of lobbying. Let me pose this question. If these fellows work with a wide range of companies and the most common proposal they make is to outsource, isn't it possible that these fellows learned something about the private sector and came away believing that outsourcing can be a good option for the Department of Defense? In other words, if the most common proposal is outsourcing, then maybe there is some merit to the idea.
Other fellows have recommended that the Defense Department do more business with the companies they worked for.
That doesn't surprise me. It's possible that these fellows are just acting as mouthpieces for a company. However, it's also possible, and I think more likely, that some of the fellows saw value in the products and services provided by the company. The Quincy report cites CVS Health as an example where a fellow acted in the interest of the company. That particular fellow made the following heinous recommendation. The Department of Defense should, quote, explore partnership opportunities with enterprises like CVS Health. It's possible that this fellow was corrupted into being a lobbyist for CVS after working there for a year. It's also possible that this fellow wrote the laziest recommendation imaginable. Speaking of lazy, let's turn to Cenk, who clearly didn't read the Quincy Institute report but still has a lot to say. Please note that I edited Cenk's comments to just the essentials.
Of the people, by the people, for the people.
Thank you, Cenk. Let's go back to Anna for another irrelevant observation from the Quincy Institute report.
And I want to give you a specific example of how these companies, these corporations leverage the fellows to get exactly what they want. And this is an excerpt from the Lever reporting. They write that the fellowship's 2013 cohort recommended repealing a Defense Department rule that prevents the agency from spending more than 50% of its military depot maintenance budget on contractors.
So, a proposal in 2013, over 10 years ago, said that the government should repeal a particular rule. Based on my research, this particular rule is still in effect, which means the company did not get what it wanted, despite what Anna said. Again, I fail to see how this proves anything about this fellowship and its relationship to lobbying. Alright, Anna regurgitates one more stupid example, which I think shows how worthless this Quincy Institute report is.
The fellows also do get something in return, right? So they essentially become lobbyists on behalf of the corporations that they're doing the fellowships in. More than 40% of the fellows have gone on to work for government contractors at some point in their post-military careers.
Notice that this statistic is about working for any government contractor after the fellowship. It is unsurprising that people leave the military and work for government contractors because these jobs probably align with their skill sets. You may be asking whether anyone went to work at the company where they had previously been a fellow. According to the Quincy Institute report, this happened, quote, in several instances. Basically, this Quincy Institute report is a bunch of nonsense. I believe it is intended to push an anti-corporation narrative, and I am very concerned about how this useless information gets legitimized by outlets like The Lever and the Young Turks. There is one thing to be grateful for, though. At least the Young Turks didn't mention Israel.
The influence of AIPAC lobbyists on the issue of Israel.
Ah,